Venuturupalli will get us started. And thank you again. And feel free to leave some obviously questions in the chat or Q&A, and we're going to save some time at the end to hopefully get to all of those. If we don't, we will definitely be reaching out afterwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Maggie, for the introduction. Thank you, Lupus LA, for inviting me and Dr. Lai to discuss the microbiome and lupus. So this is a topic of great interest amongst researchers and certainly amongst patients too. We're seeing a lot of interest. We're seeing a lot of questions in our practices on what can be done, how can we manipulate the microbiome possibly to help ourselves. So today we are fortunate to have Dr. Lai, who's going to speak to us a little bit. She's trained in integrative medicine and has spent a fair amount of her career studying holistic methods to help patients with medical illnesses. I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to give you my perspective as a rheumatologist, somebody who sees a lot of patients with lupus, and give you a lay of the land of where we are with the microbiome and lupus. So from my perspective as a rheumatologist, what I see is that a lot of patients who come to me with autoimmune diseases that are either lupus or going to be lupus, like a pre-lupus like condition, tend to have significant gastrointestinal issues. So when you drill deep into what's going on, we hear complaints of irritable bowel syndrome type things. We see constipation, diarrhea, bloating, abdominal pain issues, which seem to predate a lot of the lupus conditions, at least in my experience. Couple that with symptoms of fatigue and symptoms of difficulty focusing and concentrating, and all of the work that has really been done in the microbiome to date seems to be pointing to the microbiome as a very important organ system that we don't really take into account as medical professionals necessarily when we think about different organs that could be affected by lupus. And the question really is the microbiome affecting lupus? Is the microbiome causing lupus? And if so, how do we enhance the microbiome in any way that we can in order to prevent it? These are big and broad questions, and they generally take years and years of research to really uncover relationships of this nature. So what we're left with at this moment is our knowledge of what we're seeing, and us as physicians and you as patients interpreting data that's coming out and emerging and actually changing by the day and the minute, and then applying it to our own health habits. So that's unfortunately the state of the lab, state of the research right now, is that we don't have definitive, conclusive evidence for any of the stuff that we think is really going on. But there's a lot of promise and there's a lot of good insights that have already been established. Dr. Lai is going to present to you some of the data that's already available. She's done a beautiful presentation. I'm very proud to have her as a co-panelist. So what I would like to do is to hand over the podium to her and have her start her presentation and go over the presentation. And then I know that there's tons of questions that you guys have on the microbiome. How can we enhance it? How can we manipulate it? What can we do really to make our microbiome as healthy as possible? And both Dr. Lai and I will be available for questions. So our plan is to have a 20-25 minute presentation from her and then take your questions for about 10 or 15 minutes. And hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your pressing questions. Again, thank you, Lupus LA, for the opportunity, and look forward to hearing your questions. And thanks again, everyone, for joining.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me here at Lupus LA. I am actually an internal medicine specialist by training, and then I did extra training in integrative medicine. And one of my huge interests is lupus and, or actually the microbiome. And so today I wanted to talk to you guys about lupus and the microbiome. So I'm sharing my screen now, and I'm hoping that you guys are seeing it. And I hope that this talk, I can make this talk entertaining, educational, and useful for all of you. So in talking about lupus, there are many studies that show that there are environmental factors such as sunlight or cigarette smoking in triggering lupus flares. But there is another aspect in our environment that can really affect lupus disease activity. And this has just recently been discovered within the past decade. And that aspect is inside our gut, and it's the microbiome. So then what is the microbiome? So there's a lot of interest in the microbiome. And just to give the definition of it, the microbiome is this collection of genes from the trillion of bacteria, viruses, protozoa, and fungi that live on and inside our body. More and more, we are learning that these microbes have co-evolved with us to play these huge fundamental roles in our normal brain development, metabolism, and function. So the microbiome has this immense impact on our health. So in the talk today, I want to talk about the microbiome and how it gives us insight into why some people are skinny and why some are overweight, why some people are happy and others are depressed, and why some people get diseases and others don't, and what actions you can take to optimize your health and the health of your gut bugs. So if we look at what makes up our body, we have about 30 trillion human cells, but we actually have 39 trillion microbial cells. Hence, we're really only 43% human. And then what's even more fascinating is when we look within each human cell, we have a mitochondria. And so mitochondria is one of these organelles in our human cells that make energy for our body. And if you remember the endosymbiotic hypothesis from high school biology, the mitochondria is actually this purple bacteria that was engulfed or endocytosed into our cells billions of years ago. And the mitochondria even has its own DNA. So basically, we actually have a bacteria within each human cell. And so then the question becomes, if we have all these microbes on us and even inside our cells, are we really just bacteria colonizing a human body? We host the most microbial diversity or types of bacteria in our gut, especially our distal gut. And so our gut is home to several trillion of microbes. And all these microbes have genes that produce enzymes which interplay with our own human DNA. And what's even more fascinating is when we look at the amount of genes that we have. We as humans have about 26,000 genes. And I thought this was so fascinating in the early 2000s when I learned about it. I was really amazed by this number. But then they started sequencing the amount of genes in an apple, and they found that an apple had 57,000 genes. So what's that? It was very humbling to know that we as humans are less sophisticated than an apple. But then we started working to sequence the bacteria and the fungi and the protozoa that live on our body. And we found that these microbes contributed about 2 to up to 20 million genes to us. So at best, we're really just about 1% human genes. But if we add these microbial DNA to the diversity of our genes, then maybe we can be a little bit more sophisticated than an apple. So then what now? In the early 2000s, we were obsessed with sequencing and understanding the human genome. But this really only addresses about 1% of the total DNA in our body. The issue is we can't really understand health if we're really ignoring the other 99% of the system. In the 21st century, we had made huge public health successes due to the invention of vaccines and antibiotics. Prevalence of diseases caused by a single organism, ranging from tuberculosis to measles, mumps, has significantly declined. But at the same time, we have seen a rise in chronic diseases, ranging from Crohn's disease to multiple sclerosis to type 1 diabetes and to asthma. In 2002, when this particular paper was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a huge journal in all of medicine, none of these autoimmune conditions were linked to the microbiome, but now they are. And so the theory about why this has happened is the hygiene hypothesis, in that we have lost the ability to understand our body's ability to understand health, and the microbiome's ability to understand health, just as we have lost the vitamins in our food due to genetic agriculture. Additionally, more and more studies have shown that there's a strong link between lupus and imbalances in the gut microbiome. In a 2019 study, they showed that 61 women diagnosed with lupus actually had roughly 5 times more amount of these pathogenic gut bacteria known as Reumococcus navis than 17 women with similar ages and racial backgrounds who didn't have the disease and were healthy. Additionally, other studies showed that patients with lupus had less microbiome species diversity, and this was actually correlated with worsened disease activity. So then the question then becomes, how do these bugs get inside of us, and how do they cause diseases? And so if you think about a human, when it's first in the uterus, there's not a lot of bugs because the uterus is a very sterile environment. However, when the child passes through the birth canal and then is breastfed, that is when the microbiome starts. It may not be a coincidence that the vaginal canal co-evolved next to the rectum. This is critical to the life of a child. And it has been shown that kids who were delivered via C-section or babies who don't get breastfed, they are more prone to diseases such as asthma and allergies. So the microbiota evolves over a lifespan with key windows during transition period between in utero to infancy, to childhood, to puberty, and then into adulthood. During these times, there's an increased vulnerability to external insults, which may make one more susceptible to diseases. So early life disturbances such as diet, environmental exposures, disease, antibiotic exposures, and stress can cause large impacts to the developing gut microbiota, which then has potential to impact our health, even leading to the development of adverse physical and mental health outcomes in later life. So what are these bugs doing inside of us? So when food gets inside of us, these bugs actually go to the food, they ferment it, and then in the process of fermentation, they make these short chain fatty acids. And then these short chain fatty acids are critical in supporting our immune system, metabolism, and behavior. But then how do these microbes contribute to our health and disease? There are many mechanisms, and one is by activating the vagus nerve. There is this very fascinating thing called the brain-gut connection. And you've heard of the saying, gut feeling. It may not actually be a saying because 90% of serotonin is in our gut. And serotonin regulates mood, happiness, and anxiety. We can actually study the role of these microbes on our gut and our body by raising these sterile mice without any microbes and then putting the microbes back into them. And then we see that their behaviors are completely changed. And these are very complex behaviors like anxiety, learning, memory, and even appetite. They are all controlled in some ways by the gut microbiome. The vagus nerve is one of the central components in the parasympathetic nervous system, responsible for rest, digest, and regulation of the stress response. Scientists have seen that certain types of bacteria, like lactobacillus, when given to mice as probiotics, can reduce a mice's depression through activating this vagus nerve. And this effect was not seen when we gave the mice a vagotomy, which is actually taking out the vagus nerve. Lactobacillus can also help mice's anxiety, making them more brave and they are more able to spend time in an open field. Another way in which microbes can affect the brain is by activation of the immune system. So about 80% of the body's immune cells reside in the gut. And there are certain type of bacteria like Lactobacillus reuteri that have been shown in a lab setting to grow in abundance and cause worsened autoimmune response in lupus prone mice. The microbiome is so important that sometimes fecal transplants are done. And this is not a common procedure, but it's currently done in patients with resistant C. difficile infection. And C. diff is an infection where patients develop significant abdominal pain, nausea, and diarrhea. One of the first fecal transplants that was done at Brown University and was extremely interesting. There was a patient that needed a fecal transplant due to a very severe C. diff infection. And she received a fecal donation from her 16-year-old overweight but completely healthy daughter. And the transplant went very smoothly and she completely cleared the infection. Yet something very surprising happened. She started at a BMI of 26. However, over the period of 16 months, she went from 136 pounds to 177 pounds, gaining 34 pounds without any changes in her diet, placing her at a BMI of 33. Subsequently, she was then placed on this medically supervised liquid protein diet and exercise program. And then despite her diet and exercise efforts, her final weight was 177 pounds, placing her at a BMI of 34.5. The researchers learned that fecal transplant from an overweight individual led to weight gain in otherwise thin patients. And so knowing the influence of microbial genes and what happened to the patient that received a fecal transplant, scientists started doing these experiments. And they began doing these experiments on mice, where they found that when they took stool from an obese human and they transplanted into a microbe-free mouse, that mouse became obese. And if they did the same experiment, but they took fecal matter from a lean person, the mouse became lean. And this phenomenon has been repeated in multiple studies in big journals like Science, where mice would get lean or obese just by getting stool from a lean or obese donor. All other things like diet and lifestyle kept exactly the same. And what is extremely amazing about this is that it's even across species that the microbes can have impact in behaviors and metabolism. So transitioning back to our current biomedical model, we know that the gut affects the brain, immune system, and metabolism. So then the question becomes, can the brain also affect the gut? The answer is yes. Scientists have found that stressed people have changes in their microbiome. The microbiome actually changes in response to this emotional stress. So inside our gut, there's all these microbes. Then there's our intestinal wall, and there's this really nice mucus layer that protects us from the microbes. In times of high stress, this mucus layer actually begins to break down, and antigens from the bacteria goes into the muscle wall and therefore into our circulation. And this phenomenon is called leaky gut. Aside from stress, leaky gut or gut dysfunction can be caused by other modern lifestyle exposure, such as over-medication like antibiotics and NSAIDs and steroids, toxic chemicals, and poor diet. So like too much dairy product, too much animal products, and a lot of processed goods. So armed with all this knowledge, what's next? Not all of us can get or want to get fecal transplants to get happier or skinnier. One of the ways they do fecal transplant is they take poop, they put it in a blender, and they blend it, and they make these poop pills. But you don't really have to take poop pills to become healthy. Though I really think that musk poo would be a great business model. That's not the only way. There's actually another way. But it's also worth noting that fecal transplants are very complicated, and it's not just as simple as just taking stool from one person and putting it into another person. Sometimes it can make things worse and create other problems. So some studies actually have shown that in patients with IBS, fecal transplant worsen the severity of their IBS. So what can we do? We can change our diet. And so the concept of you are what you eat is not a completely new one. This idea dates back to Hippocrates. The newer concept is the idea that food is a language that speaks to our genes. Food communicates with our genes through color. The saddest fact is that our society is always exposed to colorful foods through convenience stores and supermarkets and vending machines. All these things are causing us to lose biodiversity, leading to all our modern diseases. And so let's talk about food. During the last 15 to 17 minutes that we have been talking, 3 Americans would have died due to the food that they ate. So this depiction actually shows what Americans actually die from, what they search on Google, and what the media actually covers. We spend our lives worried about terrorism and murder and suicide, when the main causes of death are heart disease, all cancers, stroke, and diabetes. All the ones I starred can be linked to our diet. If you look at homicide and terrorism, it's all the way at the bottom. Food is such an ingrained part in our everyday lives, and yet we live in this awful reality now, where even with all our medical advancements, we have one of the shortest lifespan just due to the food that we eat. And food is actually the answer in helping our microbiome. So in this fermented or fiber food study at Stanford, known by its catchy name, FIFO, it showed that students can actually change the composition of their gut microbiome within 30 days just by increasing the probiotics and the prebiotic foods that they consume. So what are probiotics? Probiotics are the good bacteria living in your gut, and they support your overall wellness. Fermented foods such as kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt are rich in strains of good bacteria. Prebiotics, also known as fiber, are foods for your probiotics. Your gut bacteria needs this and it loves this. Fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains are rich in prebiotics. But you have to vary up the types of fiber that you eat to introduce gut biodiversity. And the key is biodiversity. And this is accomplished through exposing your gut to as many different types of food, and I should say whole foods, as possible. Fiber has actually been shown to help in reducing severity of lupus. And mice who were fed with this resistant starch, which is a diet that mimics a high fiber diet in humans, had improved disease states and actually lived longer. And this was due to decreased interferon production and lower levels of pathogenic bacteria. So I hate fad diets. I don't believe in them. I don't think they work. But I like to joke about my Dr. Isabella Lai microbiome diet. And so it's basically just getting 30 grams of fiber per day from 30 different fruits and vegetables per week for 30 days, but really forever. And getting about 1 serving of probiotics per day. And so it's the 30-30-30 diet. Then the next question becomes, how about probiotics and how about probiotic pills? When I think about I think that probiotics can be very helpful in certain cases. And there are a lot of studies done in figuring out the exact pill for the exact situation. But I really think probiotics is just filling a bathtub with an eyedropper. The other reason I don't like probiotics is because everybody thinks any probiotics would work. And it's like if you came to me and you tell me, well, hey doc, I'm sick. And I tell you, well, just go to a pharmacy and get a drug. And then you ask me, well, what drug should I get? And then I tell you, well, it doesn't really matter. Any would work. That's the same with probiotics. There are just too many types and just not enough data to know what works. This is actually a picture from the Whole Foods aisle in Sherman Oaks. a lot of companies are cashing in on this probiotic craze, and it just is very expensive without the data to support it. Instead of getting probiotics through pills, studies have shown that biodiversity is the true key. So there's a lot of evidence that fermented foods can be very beneficial. And the exact reason is not completely clear. But if we remember that the goal of our gut microbes is to ferment our food, then if we eat fermented foods, we are selecting for the bacteria that have already proven that they know how to do the job. Taking probiotics is kind of like, getting a very smart medical student who really knows everything in theory to take care of a patient, who really don't have the experience. Whereas if you ate like fermented foods, you're choosing a very seasoned attending doctor who knows it and knows the ins and outs of that medical illness and how to treat it. Examples of fermented foods include kombucha, sauerkraut, kimchi, fermented yogurt, and like miso, tempeh, natto. These fermented foods have been shown to actually decrease inflammation and increase microbiota diversity, thereby contribute to the overall health. So in addition to nutrition, other lifestyle modification can improve our microbiome also. Believe it or not, the gut bugs actually sleep and they have this night and day rhythm, just like we do. Many scientists are actually doing research on their circadian rhythms of our bacteria. So if you don't sleep, your gut bugs don't sleep. So make sure you get good rest. Exercise also helps stimulate a good gut microbiome. Another way to improve your microbiome is to limit antibiotic use. So antibiotics can be very beneficial, but antibiotics are used very inappropriately nowadays. You know where most of the antibiotics are used? I didn't know until about a few years ago. What I find extremely scary is that 70% of all antibiotics that are used in the US are given to animals to feed the animals. And this is where we get our eggs and our milk and our meat from. And why do they do that? Why do they give antibiotics to animals? The reason they do that is because it gets the animal fatter faster, and so they can go to market quicker, and so they can maximize profit. So 70%, that's why I think we're having so much bacteria resistance. The other times that antibiotics are used inappropriately is prescribing them for viral infections. Antibiotics kill bacteria, not viruses. So when we take them at the wrong time or demand it when we get a cold or a flu, it can actually impact our microbiome, which can then lead to poor health outcomes, weight gain, and diseases. So in summary, the microbiome is extremely important. Poor microbes can lead to a whole host of diseases impacting our happiness, brain health, immune system, metabolism, and much more. Poor microbiome diversity have been linked to autoimmune diseases like lupus. It's very important to eat a varied plant-based diet with lots of fiber and probiotic-rich fermented foods. It's important to limit the intake of unnecessary medication, and then adopt healthy lifestyle habits such as sleeping at regular times and staying active for your well-being and the well-being of your microbiome. So I hope that this talk gives you a few tools that you can use to optimize your well-being and your health. Please let me know if you have any questions, and you can also message me or call my office for further information. I hope that this was helpful, and I can open it up for some questions now.
A great talk. Thank you so much, Dr. Lai. That was so helpful, very thoughtful, and you really summarized a very difficult topic in a wonderful manner. So I'm going to ask you to, if you don't mind, Yeah, let's get to some questions. I see that there's a lot of activity on the question answer as well as the chat. I think I would like to go first a little bit and say that my take from Dr. Lai's talk and seeing some of the questions is I would like to summarize, maybe editorialize some of these comments that are coming our way. So first of all, what Dr. Lai is talking about is that the gut microbiome plays a huge role in health and wellness. I think that has been established. We know that for a fact. We know that when diseases occur, what we have seen is that microbial diversity, that means the kinds of bacteria, the types of bacteria that we're finding, and the numbers of different species of bacteria that we're seeing in a patient's gut lowers. So we know those as facts. What we do not know is how exactly to cure a disease using the microbiome. That is still a matter of intense research. That's still going on. So there's many questions in the chat, for example, hey, which probiotic do you recommend? In fact, Dr. Lai clearly showed in her talk that there's no one probiotic that fits, that's a magic pill for everybody. So we don't want you really to go away from the stock, stay feeling that, okay, there's a pill out there that my doctor has not prescribed to me, and why haven't they done that when these other doctors are talking about it? That's not the gist of this talk. What we want to do is we want to introduce you to the fact that the microbiome is important. Diversity of the microbiome is very important. And the best things that we know as of now in order to change the microbiome seem to be related to diet. And that's probably the best way. There are certain fermented foods, there are certain prebiotic fibers. So prebiotic fibers, again, to restate what Dr. Lai said, are fibers that are not digested in the initial phase of digestion through the small intestine, reach the large intestine where a lot of the microbes live. So these are food for those bacteria. By increasing prebiotic fibers over a long period of time, you can change the microbial diversity and encourage good bacteria to grow in there. So that's generally the gist of how we can manipulate based on the knowledge that we have until now. There was a really interesting question, which I think I clicked off, which said, I'm a lupus patient. I see a lot of things about raw foods, but I'm also concerned that some of these live raw foods may actually cause problems for someone like me who's immunosuppressed. And that, I think, is an important point to make, that in trying to improve microbial diversity and in recommending that you can try some of these foods that are raw, etc. A patient of mine comes to mind who got a very rare condition, listeriosis, from eating certain foods like usually dairy, etc. And that's unpasteurized, but and it was unfortunate. But those sorts of things can indeed happen. So we do want to underscore that these are general recommendations that we're making today. We're giving you a lay of the land. We're telling you where the research is at right now, what our understanding is right now, and what we can do that makes common sense, that's safe enough to use. So most of these recommendations are going to be very general, but we really encourage you to talk to your doctors. There are going to be conditions, especially in lupus patients who are immunosuppressed with certain medications because of serious organ-threatening disease, where raw foods, probiotics, etc., may not be appropriate. So you have to talk to your doctors. So just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Dr. Lai, I don't know if you want to add anything to that comment before we start taking patient questions.
Yeah, so it's not just about fermented foods. I think what's even more important is the fiber intake and introducing your gut to as many different types of fiber that you can. And when I say fiber, I do not mean supplements, because the fiber supplements, those type of fibers are not actually food for your microbiome, the good gut bacteria that is in your gut. They don't like the artificial fiber. They like the actual fiber that comes from anything that grows on a tree or that you can find in the ground, and you can dig in the ground and get food from it. But if you're talking about anything that comes in a box or comes in like a colorful container, then that's not something that is really healthy for your body. And Another thing that I want to kind of touch upon is the probiotic pill. So actually the Sonnenberg group from Stanford said that even if you were to take probiotic pills, they don't actually work unless you have a baseline very healthy diet. And it's because healthy gut bacteria don't want to colonize an environment that's not habitable. So if you think about like the moon, for example, we can send like hundreds of thousands of people to the moon, but even if we send those people to the moon, those humans can't really live there because the moon can't grow the things that we need. It doesn't have water, it doesn't have the ozone layer. And it's the same with our microbes. If the environment is not right, it can't live in it. So it's really important to cultivate that healthy gut environment. And so even if you can't eat the probiotic, you can't take the probiotic pills, you can't eat the fermented foods, you can introduce the different types of fresh fruits and vegetables that are necessary. And so I usually tell my patients, like, try one new thing a week. So it could be like, like a dragon fruit. That's something that is very different. So that's something to introduce to your gut.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. So we've got a ton of great questions. I think we'll try to address a few of these that seem to have some common threads. So Dr. Lai, I'm going to ask you to comment on a couple too, and I'll also take some comments. So one of them is from a doctor who says that I have some probiotic pills contain L-reuteri, which has been shown to flare lupus in certain cases. Is that a good recommendation? Should I be telling them to avoid it? Do you have any take on that, Dr. Lai?
Like I said, I really shy away from probiotic pills in general. I just don't think that there's enough data for us to know what's actually good and what's actually not. And even if everything is about biodiversity, right? So if you're only introducing like 5 different strains of bacteria from the probiotics, how much benefit are you really getting from it?
I'm with you too. I think probiotics have been shown to be very short acting. They don't really take hold because they don't have the right environment to thrive. And if at all they work for short periods of time. Whether they cause harm or not when taken as a probiotic, don't know, probably not, but I don't know for sure. The other point is somebody asked a very interesting question on postbiotics, taking butyrate as a postbiotic. Is that a safer first option to try for lupus patient? Do you want to take a comment on that at all?
Yeah, so butyrate is one of the like fermented byproducts, like what you would get after. I don't think there's enough like data on that either. So it probably won't cause any harm, but if you're thinking it would provide any benefit, I would say there's not enough data.
So I would say that just for people who are not familiar with this, so there's prebiotics. So these are fibers, compounds that are used as food for the microbiome. There's the probiotics, which are different combinations of microbes that we think are healthy. And then there's the postbiotics, which are really products that are produced by the microbiome. So the question that this person asked was, hey, is a postbiotic safer in lupus patient? Answer, of course, is we don't know because we don't have enough data for it. It certainly makes sense because some of the products you might be missing can be replaced in that manner. However, we just don't have enough data, as Dr. Lai said, to be definitive in our recommendations here. Another interesting question that came up is, can drinking bone broth heal the gut? Dr. Lai, do you have a take on that at all?
I love recommending bone broth. I think that it's very like nutritious and patients feel very good with it. I don't know if there's enough data to say bone broth can heal the gut. But I do recommend it because I think
it's
good. It feels
good.
Yeah.
Good for the soul.
It feels good for the soul. Yeah.
Yeah. Lack of data. Again, please remember that we like to recommend things based on data. There's a lot of trouble studying lupus patients because lupus is probably 100 different types of things going on, which we all label together as lupus based on our current knowledge. So what works in one person may not work in another. So we are really at the surface level for a lot of these questions that you guys are asking us. They're great questions, but I'm not sure we have great answers for you. Another question was, hey, what is miso and how does that work as a probiotic? Cooking it, doesn't that kill the bugs? So want to take that, Dr. Lai? Any thoughts on it?
Very low level, very low heat won't kill the bugs.
Yeah.
It's when like boiling it. It's same as yogurt. Like if you guys have ever made yogurt before, it's actually you just take a bottle of condensed milk and then you put some just whole milk in it, and then you just get like a container of plain yogurt, and then you put it in a pressure cooker, you press the yogurt setting, and then you make yogurt. It still kind of warms it up, but it won't. It's like it's growing the bacteria, because bacteria thrive in kind of a warm, moist environment.
And I don't know this for a fact, but I would say that, you know, being fermented soy, some of the partially digested products can serve as a prebiotic, even if you're killing off some of the microbes. So that might be another potential mechanism, I would say.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of questions on, hey, which probiotic do you recommend? And it's very clear that Dr. Lai and I don't recommend a specific probiotic. There isn't one that we know of. And then there's a question here. Have you seen a big improvement in the microbiome of people with lupus who changed their diet, and how so? I don't know if you have any experience at all. I have some, which I'm happy to share, Dr. Lai, if you want.
You see a lot more lupus patients.
Yeah, so I can say that I've had a few patients who've made some significant changes to their diet, and in my clinic too, I'm a big proponent of anti-inflammatory diets and changing the way that we eat. I feel that, hey, whatever's got you to this place of actually having lupus probably hasn't worked so well for you, so why not change it? Without going to real specifics of an individual case, because it really varies. I mean, some people, what works for one person may actually harm the other person. So without, you know, giving specifics, I would say, yeah, I've certainly seen patients change their microbiomes, their gut bowel movements move much better. They change the bowel consistency, the bloating goes away, and they start feeling better overall. And I have actually seen some patients whose lupus has improved significantly. So I cannot, without having good evidence-based recommendations that this is the protocol to follow for this particular type of patient, we cannot make more general recommendations, but I've certainly seen it in my practice, and I continue to see it. And I do believe that we're on the cusp of understanding something very important. And down the road, as we know more, this will be part of our therapeutic armamentarium.
A thing to note is when you start changing your diet and you're eating a lot more like prebiotic fiber and fermented foods and stuff, you're going to get a little bit of bloating just because your body's just adapting to that new diet. And so that's something to be expected. But once your body's used to that amount of fiber, it actually feels very good. And you just feel like less heated up almost, or less inflamed in some ways.
Yeah. So there's some great comments too, and some questions made it into the comment section. I'm sorry, I think I recommended that initially. But some of the questions, there's Sudi says that she or he has been able to make their lupus go into remission and maintain it with dietary changes. Good job, and keep it up. And I do think that that's a good thing to do. Is a patient eating sushi unwise? I'm not aware of anything problematic other than potentially mercury from large fish, but Dr. Lai, you see any concerns about that?
No,
Okay.
I think that sushi, I don't see why that would be.
Yeah, even though it's raw, it's generally clean, healthy fish, potentially, technically, it's supposed to be at least.
Just be
So,
careful with mercury. Yeah.
Yes, mercury is probably the biggest concern. And then someone had questions about a colostomy bag, and you know, unfortunately, I you know, don't have a support group to recommend for that. And then a really good question is, what if you are sensitive or have food allergies? Dr. Lai, how would you approach that kind of a patient? What would you do?
Yeah, so I usually say when you are introducing a new food, introduce it and then wait a week and see what kind of reaction you have to it. And then it could be that you're reacting to something else in the environment. So it's always worth reintroducing it again at another time. That's usually, and when we say allergies, it depends on what type of allergy. So as long as you're not getting like a diffuse body rash and you're not going into anaphylactic shock where you can't breathe, then I think that it's okay to try to reintroduce it.
Yeah, I agree completely. So the point of the matter is that different people react to different foods in different ways. We believe that the gut bacteria, the microbiome composition may play a role in how you react to certain things, but also may provide some insights and hints to researchers on what you're actually deficient in and what foods might be better for you. So stay tuned on this topic, because over the next few years, we're working on all of these questions. And we will have some answers. We will be able to tell you more specifically, hey, your gut bacterial profile looks like X, and these are the things you need to do to get to point B, etc. So I think that the future is bright. Currently, there's a lot of questions, but we're so happy to see the sort of engagement in the lupus community about this very, very important issue. And I'm thrilled to be participating in a lot of research in this area, and I'm thrilled to have colleagues like Dr. Lai, who's opened her practice recently and is taking great care of our patients and helping them manage some of these very complex issues. So Dr. Lai, I'll let you have the final word for our panel discussion, and then we'll hand over back to the hosts to go to the next part of the session.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me here, and thank you for all these, your participation and all these interesting questions. I think the only thing I would leave with is the, I love the 30-30-30 diet. I always joke about it. I think it's really important to get 30 grams of fiber a day. Start slowly. So if you're only taking in 10 to 15 grams, then go up only by 5 grams each week before you get to 30. Don't go from like 10 grams of fiber per day straight to 30, because then you're going to have a lot of abdominal upset. And then really about just trying to get different types of food in your system. So 30 different types of food, and so fruits, vegetables, legumes. And then try it for 30 days, see how you feel. And if you feel great, just keep doing it, because it's very safe.
Great. Wonderful information. Thank you all again for joining. It's all about the diversity. And that's what we got to go for. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.